Learn, experiment, achieve, and take off. We're anthropologists and social scientists who put leaders under the microscope. We are your eyes and ears to dig up the most valuable insights for success to help make you and your business better. We give you the tools to lead your future and help build leaders we all want to look up to. So, rise to your potential. Launch. Welcome. I'm Rebecca Bennett, your host. Ruckus Wireless has been going through a lot of change in the past few months. I'm sharing their story with you because they have proven themselves as leaders in change management and have some great best practices that can help you. They are the company that is pursuing smart cities. That is, cities that are wirelessly connected to a network that allows them to automate and become more efficient, such as smart lighting, smart traffic and parking systems, public safety, and air quality. But because the concept of smart cities is so intriguing and utilizes technology on the cutting edge, it also makes Ruckus Wireless an extremely sought-after company. Ruckus Wireless has undergone several acquisitions in a short period of time and ultimately got bought out by Aeris. In these moments of change, there has been a tremendous amount of learning. And as industries pivot and change in this digital revolution, many companies will find themselves in a similar situation. And it is those that come out ahead of the change that will find success in this new era. Now, before we jump into the interview with Ruckus Wireless's president, Dan Rabinovitsj, I want to share with you Ruckus's unusual M&A story of how they got to where they are today. Because it not only reflects the constant state of change that companies are finding themselves in, particularly those in a consolidating industry, but it is a testament to how strong a company can be when their survival is at stake. Ruckus was a publicly held company on the New York Stock Exchange that went through a series of acquisitions. What did they have that everyone wanted? They had an enterprise-class Wi-Fi solution that was well recognized in the industry. Brocade Communications is an enterprise networking company that did not have a wireless asset in their portfolio, and thus approached Ruckus with a buyout offer. The strategy was to combine their two services and technologies into a more comprehensive offering. The deal closed in May of 2016. Then Broadcom, a foreign semiconductor company, came along and bought Brocade 6 months later as a part of a vertical integration strategy. However, the funny thing about this acquisition was that Broadcom only bought Brocade for their network storage system. The semiconductor chips that they originally were selling to Ruckus and Brocade were the same chips they were selling to Ruckus's and Brocade's competitors, and thus were essentially buying their own customers. In order to keep Ruckus and the part of Brocade that bought chips as customers, Broadcom had to put them up for sale on the open market. Another way one can think about this is, let's say the Broadcom family were buying a house, the Brocade house. But in order to get the house, the furniture and all the house's contents has to come with it. But Broadcom doesn't need the stuff inside, so they buy the house anyway and then turn around and sell the furniture. And lying on the couch that was for sale was a dog, orphaned and looking for a new home. And that dog was Ruckus, Ruckus Wireless's logo. And here's Ruckus Wireless's president, Dan Rabinovitsj, to take us back to that vulnerable moment when Ruckus the dog was looking for a new home.
So we were only, in Brocade, we were there less than 6 months. And basically at that particular day, we knew that we were going to go and be part of another company.
Gotcha.
We didn't know how that was going to look because at that particular time, there was just 100% uncertainty. So, and the reason why, Broadcom could not keep us or other parts of Brocade was because we are direct competitors to their other customers. So think about this as like if Walgreens bought a pharmaceutical company, the pharmaceutical company is in the supply chain to Walgreens. That's kind of what happened. Broadcom is a semiconductor company, so they sell the chips that go into our products. They sell those same chips to our competitors. In the case of the storage area networking business, they wanted to do a vertical integration of that. So they just wanted to bring that in as a system business and keep it. But they had to sell everything else. So it was a very strange situation. I would say remarkable in a lot of ways, but in particular because a big chunk of what was left of Brocade, including Ruckus, would now go into the open market to be sold. There was an announcement that put us into a state of complete uncertainty. We didn't know who we were going to be owned by. We didn't even know, theoretically, we could have just been toast
Sure.
at that point in time. The reason why we were fairly certain that we would not just disappear is because we were a profitable, growing business with a scarce asset. So we had a lot of conviction around the strength of the business, the competitiveness and the strength of the products. So I actually did not have a single day of doubt that we would find a new home. Our business was in a really good spot. So we were sure we were going to land somewhere. The question was where, and how that whole thing went down was very interesting.
And how did that go down?
We went through the process of selling the Ruckus business, and we were doing that in parallel with the other groups in Brocade that were also selling because of this Broadcom acquisition of Brocade. So that was very interesting because at some point we were trying to sell all of the assets together, which would have basically kept a lot of synergy with the sales organization, etc. But at the end, we ended up selling the pieces off individually, and that's when Eris made the winning bid to buy the Ruckus business, and that was announced in February of 2017. Now, the interesting thing is, from February of 2017 until December of 2017, it's hard for me to actually say that, but December 1st is when we officially closed the Eris acquisition. We had almost 1 year where we could not close the transaction because of regulatory issues. And normally, regulatory issues are important. You need to clear, for example, antitrust concerns. So the Federal Trade Commission is going to review transactions of a certain size and complexity, and they'll say, yes, you're creating a monopoly. We're not going to, approve this deal, or no, you're fine. You can go ahead. We cleared all of the regulatory approvals from foreign entities, from the FTC, but we still had one regulatory hurdle that was remaining, and I'll preface this by saying this was really a concern with the Broadcom acquisition of Brocade, and that was from CFIUS. So this is an area that is really interesting. So the CFIUS stands for the Committee on Foreign Investment in the United States, and basically that committee's job is to look at transactions of American companies by foreign companies and determine whether those are risking our national security or our national interest. So it's a very broad-ranging set of responsibilities. And if you think about it, it's a very important task, right? Because as American citizens, we would like to think that our government is going to make sure that companies with important technology or that have, significant role in serving the United States government will not be acquired by foreign companies who could then manipulate that position or put us in harm, right? So CFIUS was taking a very, very long time looking at this Broadcom transaction, and part of that was because Broadcom was a foreign company domiciled in Singapore. So even though Broadcom started in the United States, Avago, its parent company, started in the United States. They were part of HP. At the end of the day, they had become a Singaporean company, and that put them into this category where CFIUS could review the transaction. And that was going on for a very long time. And that puts a lot of stress on people, right? Because, first of all, we'd gone through the acquisition of Brocade in May of 2016. Then the announcement that we were going to be sold in November, and not clear what the buyer, was going to look like. And then we didn't find that out. Let's say that some of us knew before then, but the rest of the general population didn't know until February of 17. So that's basically a little more than a quarter total uncertainty, like don't know what's going to happen. Mm-hmm. And then we spent from February to December of all last year waiting.
Wow.
waiting for the transaction to close. And, that makes customers nervous, that makes employees nervous, that makes everybody very, nervous. And you can imagine if you were in that situation, like how would you react? And to me, that's what's so interesting about this story. Really looking back on it, having some distance now, to me, what's remarkable is not only did our business actually perform well, I will say that we had a rough quarter, the quarter after the announcement. We definitely got hit on the revenue. But after that, once we established where we were going, the business responded extremely well. So our partners, our customers, they stuck with us. And our employees really were amazing and just kept focused on what was important, delivering to our promise, on execution for products, keeping the partner relationship strong, and delighting customers. It was really like the mantra here was, yes, this whole acquisition thing is going on, but our job is make sure that the business runs and make sure that we keep customers happy. And if we just do those two things, everything's going to be okay. And I would just say that the inspiration for me was just watching how well the team responded to that very, very big ask and very big challenge. So, looking back, I can hardly believe that we spent that whole year waiting for the transaction to close, because it just seems like an improbable amount of time passed. Everything worked out. And now we crossed the finish line and we're at the starting gate again with Eris as we integrate. But, I just feel like we landed in a very good spot with a great company, and, they appreciate what we do. And in the end, we kept our partners and our customers with us, which is the whole point of being in business, right?
So you mentioned that you waited quite a long time. So during that time, I know when companies do have to sit around and wait for things like that to clear, it's hard for them to really move forward in anything, and they just sustain operations. Is that kind of what you did, or were you trying to work on any other initiatives while this was happening that were maybe already you were in the middle of that you had to stop, or what was your approach?
We didn't stop anything. In fact, we kept exactly on the original budget that we had for the operating plan for the year. So we were spending on R&D. We were spending on channel programs. We were spending on everything that we had committed to. And, that was largely in support of, we got great support from Brocade to continue that level of investment so that the business would not degrade during the waiting period. So, the leadership of Brocade did a great job committing to keeping that going. And Broadcom agreed also to that. And if you think about it, for Broadcom as an acquirer of the Brocade business, they also wanted to make sure that our business would be successful, right? Because they were selling it, effectively. Everybody was on the same page that the Ruckus business needed to get investment and needed to grow. So the good news is we did not go into sustaining mode. We didn't go hide in a hole and wait for the storm to pass. We were out there, cranking through the whole process and communicating a lot. If there's one thing that I will say we learned through this, lots of communication, sincere, authentic communication. Like when there's uncertainty, call it out and say, yeah, this sucks, it's uncertain, but we're going to get through it. Mm-hmm. And making sure that people knew what was going on to the very best of our abilities to share information. And that includes not only employees, but also our partners and our customers. So, I think through that process of frequent communication and just, lots and lots of chatting with people informally out in the, in our value-added reseller and distributors, reassuring them that things were going to work out, I think that really paid off for us in the end.
When businesses acquire each other, there can be two kinds of buys, which we call evolutionary and transformational. Evolutionary is considered more of a natural next step in terms of expansion, where the business buys additional market share, while transformational is more disruptive and the business buys perhaps into a different market or business altogether, which tends to be more risky. When I asked Dan about the Ruckus acquisition, he said,
Yeah, I would say that when Brocade acquired Ruckus, that was definitely evolutionary, right? It was take a standalone enterprise wireless company and put it together with a larger enterprise networking company. Mm-hmm. So I would not call that like a bold, risky, transformational move, mm-hmm. but certainly a very, very smart kind of consolidation and integration.
But when we brought up Aris, he said that the acquisition was indeed more transformational for both Aris and Ruckus. At the time, Aris was a company focused on residential networking, and they wanted to buy into a new segment, that of enterprise networking. Here he shares more on why that was.
So that's a fairly bold move on the part of Aris to diversify their business. That's a much bigger deal, I think. The other thing that's kind of interesting is it puts together a company now that has a very substantial market share and footprint in residential networking and a company with a large footprint in the enterprise with combined a very large shared footprint with service providers. That's a pretty different thing. That doesn't exist in the market today. So it kind of opens up opportunities for us that we wouldn't have had before. Because now, for example, we can start to say, we can start taking advantages of a lot of innovation that's happening in the residential market in the enterprise space. So examples of that are things like voice control and command. So I'm thinking of things like Google Voice and Alexa. That's really taking off in the home market, but we believe that the same kind of capability will come into the enterprise. By taking advantage of things going on in both of these markets, Aris together with Ruckus now has the ability to leverage those trends in a combined way with much bigger scale. So it's pretty interesting.
Yeah, that's really fascinating. Have you seen any other kind of acquisitions in your industry where companies like you have been expanding out into those other markets? Have you seen similar mergers or mergers by your competitors that you're being wary of, keeping an eye on?
Well, I would say the Wi-Fi space in general has been, there has been a lot of consolidation, particularly for companies that were subscale and not profitable. So there were, several of our much, much smaller competitors were acquired in the past 4 or 5 years. And those have largely been consolidated inside of larger networking companies. But not too many examples of success there, to be honest. A lot of them were already quite troubled businesses. And so when they got integrated, they were already, I would say, not doing spectacularly well. And so they had a struggle. I've not seen anything like this before. I think the Aris-Ruckus tie-up is really a different kind of animal.
It sounds like you guys are kind of an early mover in this particular market. What do you see as your next hurdles over the next few years in terms of competition or technology challenges?
The Wi-Fi market is pretty well established and it's still growing. 8 to 10% CAGR a year just in the enterprise space. So it's a healthy, growing market, and we address a very wide range of applications in the Wi-Fi space. If you look at where Ruckus is strong, we are very strong with the hospitality industry, in education, K through 12 and higher education, with multi-dwelling units, service providers. So we have a kind of, a large number of vertical markets that we go after. So it's an established market. I think our way of growing in that very kind of broad space is we tend to focus on areas where we have either a significant technology advantage and we can bring that and it's easy to demonstrate, or we have a significant deep understanding of the vertical market and we can address all the pain points that are inside of that. And it's some combination of those two things that have given us the biggest growth potential. So as we move into new vertical markets, we tend to spend a lot of time figuring out what do customers care about, what do they need, what do they wake up worrying about, and then we go solve those issues. And we do that with some combination of our unique technology and also, from a business perspective, how do we create an offer that's compelling and really attractive to customers?
Oh, okay.
The good thing about the lessons learned with the Brocade acquisition, one of the things that was the most challenging for us, Rebecca, was we had to do an integration of our sales organization. And when you bring two sales organizations together that are both kind of in the same practice, that's very difficult. There's a lot of emotional stuff that goes along with that. And so the good news is, because Eris is acquiring an enterprise business, they don't have a go-to-market like ours today. So we have avoided a lot of the difficult integration topics because our sales organization is staying with the business intact, right? Mm-hmm. So that's actually been pretty smooth sailing. Where we are doing integration is around the service providers because, we both have a large footprint there. But that's a relatively smaller number of people. And we're doing that in a very, let's say, thoughtful and methodical way so that we're just being really careful not to break stuff as we go along. Other than that, the visual challenge, the visual changes that are kind of most obvious is we changed the name of Ruckus to Ruckus Networks, mm-hmm. which kind of acknowledged the fact that we have a much bigger portfolio since we integrated our Wi-Fi business with the switching business from Brocade. And we changed the logo very subtly. In fact, it's interesting how many people notice and don't notice, but we have a barking black lab as our mascot and as part of our logo. And when we became part of Eris and we changed the brand to Ruckus Networks, an Eris company, we gave the dog an actual proper tail that he could wag. And we also actually it could be a she. We haven't. I don't know if we've actually determined whether Ruckus could. Yeah. So but he or she can wag the tail now. And we also took the leash off, which is very symbolic of now we can run free.
Nice.
So those are kind of I think those are the most obvious changes to people looking from the outside.
As you guys kind of pivot and turn this big ship, what parts do you or have you been organizing the actual change process, and what parts do you kind of see as places where you can just go with the flow and kind of see what happens?
Oh, yeah, that's a good question. So first of all, there is a science to mergers and acquisitions, and operationally, the good news about having so much time between February and December to close the transaction, we had a lot of time basically to prepare for merging and integrating, back office systems, ordering systems, licensing, all IT, HR benefits, all those kind of, I don't want to call them, they're kind of mechanical. You have to take all the ways that you run your business and integrate them into the acquiring companies. So we've done that, and that's a very methodical, kind of deterministic process. With always some surprises at the very end. You never get everything 100% correct, and then you have to course correct after that. But that stuff is, I would say more mechanical mm-hmm. and less strategic. I think the strategic pieces are coming together now. We're really thinking about, okay, where do we want to take this business over the next 5 years, and how can we grow much faster than the market and become a much bigger player? And those things are unfolding. And in fact, we're meeting on a fairly regular basis now, just having those discussions, because that's the exciting let's say, terraforming part of doing a big acquisition, right?
And another challenge in M&As is merging cultures. I heard you mention earlier about integrating the residential and enterprise sales teams. Was there any cultural clashing or compromises? Anything that you have had to mediate or manage? And how did you decide which culture was right?
Well, like I said, I think in the case of the Eris acquisition, we're only a month in, so I don't think we've had time for like a really good culture clash yet.
Okay, maybe too
but
soon
to be
then.
honest, the cultures of the companies actually are pretty compatible. One thing I will say absolutely without any hesitation is that culture will overcome every other adversity or bump in the road. And I do think that the one thing that has gotten Ruckus through all of the acquisitions in the past couple of years and all the integration and all of those challenges is that we have a pretty well chiseled culture with a very strong focus on teamwork and resilience and making customers happy. And that's what got us through all of the adversity and uncertainty in very good shape, I might add. And I think it's also part of what's going to make us successful as we merge. I mean, the reality is anytime you bring two different companies together and two different cultures, there will be some compromise. There always is. And sometimes it's painful. Sometimes it's just, kind of subtle adjustments that don't become, really important over the long term. But there'll always be something. The key point is making sure that you know what you absolutely cannot let go of if you want to be successful. And I think time and time again in large acquisitions, people underestimate just how important that is. There's a time when you have to be able to say, I can't give this up without giving up the essence of what we are as a business. And knowing and having the wisdom to actually, stand your ground on those important topics, but giving in on the things that don't matter as much and being flexible, because that's also part of growth and an evolution, right? Mm-hmm. And I think, that's kind of that's the wisdom, right? You need to know when to really go with the flow and when to put your foot down and say, hey, this is really important. We don't want to give this up. So I think that's kind of the place that we'll start from, and I think that'll guide us well over the next year as we become a much tighter integrated company.
That's a pretty good sage piece of advice, kind of sticking to your essence. As long as you know that pretty well, I think you're right. It's a little easier to know when to put the foot down.
Yeah, exactly.
In the month that you have experienced change so far, have you had any major issues, and how has the support from the acquiring company been so far?
In a month, I mean, what I can say is that the Eris executive team has been awesome, actually, at being very accommodating to what we need and kind of, I would say, going above and beyond to make sure we have all the resources and whatever is required to do integration, we've been very easily getting that done. So we haven't really had issues so far, which is good. I think one of the things that's really important is that Eris understands how different our business is, and they've really embraced that. And that's good. When you don't know something, it makes it 10 times easier to do a good job of integration, because you'll just continue to ask questions and understand that this is a business that can't necessarily use the same playbook you've used in your own business for a long time. Mm-hmm. So far, I would say really good. Like I said, teams get along well, compatible cultures.
Did you guys end up going down any roads and realized that it was a wrong turn? Were there any mistakes that were made that stand out that the company learned from?
Mistakes were definitely made. For sure. I mean, I think the Brocade acquisition was definitely not normal because we never really got a chance to fully integrate. I would say probably the most surprising thing is that we had targeted November 1st, 2016 as day one of full integration of Ruckus into Brocade.
Oh, wow.
And we announced the Broadcom deal November 2nd.
Yeah.
So, I mean, we never really became one company. And so, like I said, I mean, as we brought the two sales organizations and other support organizations together, there was a lot of complexity there, and definitely created challenges for us. And I think it was also, that was our first experience of going as a standalone company to be part of another company. Mm-hmm. And that's always difficult, right? So in a way, by getting to do this deal with Eris so soon after we went through the first experience, mm-hmm. I would say the benefit of, I mean, there's obviously a downside to that, which is like, okay, a lot of changes back to back. I mean, that's a lot of challenge. But the flip side is, man, we really know, probably better than most, we really, really know, like, what's important, what's not, and how to do this in a way that, preserves the value of the business. So having gone through the Brocade experience and not really getting to complete the mission mm-hmm. actually has been motivation to get it right going through the Eris acquisition.
I see. So you mentioned that this was the first time that Ruckus had been through a merger such as this. Have you personally in your career been through a change like this before, a merger or acquisition?
Yeah, I've been through a lot.
And how would you compare this one?
I've been acquired multiple times. I've also done quite a few. I've led quite a few acquisitions on behalf of other companies. So, yeah, I've done a lot of M&A. I'll just put it that way.
Okay. And I've
never ever experienced anything like the last
one.
The last year and a half. 2 years has been very, I would say, unusual.
Uh-huh.
This is borderline exotic.
It's exotic now.
This is exotic. I mean, I don't think you couldn't have written a piece of fiction about this one because it just seems really crazy. Even hardened M&A people, bankers, folks that do a lot of this, like this is their normal lives. Mm-hmm. Everyone looked at the journey that Ruckus has been on over the past 2 years and said, wow. You guys have been on a crazy ride.
Yeah, for sure.
And so, again, if I take that at face value, I just look at the people who rode that roller coaster and came out in a great spot as, heroes, every single one of them. Mm-hmm. And I'm forever grateful to all the employees for keeping their head down and keeping cool and understanding what was really important here.
Mm-hmm. From your past experience, were there tidbits of knowledge that you remembered that had worked well that you tried to utilize in this M&A? Were there any synergies that you could have leveraged?
I would say every acquisition that I've been involved with is different. And they're different because the people are different, the businesses have been different. And I think there's some general, like I said, the mechanical pieces, you definitely want to apply best practices, right? How do you merge IT systems? How do you merge, your business systems together? What's the best practice around all of the HR topics, retention of people, talking about benefits, all those things? There's some best practices there, and absolutely every single one you can rely on your experience in the prior one, and that gives you a lot of informed, let's say, playbooks and processes to follow. But at the end of the day, when you buy a business, you're buying a collection of people, intellectual property, and customers, and those tend to be pretty different mm-hmm. each time. And so, I think for people who do a lot of M&A, I think the successful ones, where the businesses that they buy actually grow and thrive, really take the time to figure out what does this particular business and this group of people need to be successful. And yeah, that'd be my take. Okay. They're more different than they are alike. Now, some people would take exactly the opposite. Like, I can look at a company that, like Cisco, who were extremely acquisitive at one time, and they're still very acquisitive. But at one time, they were buying a lot of companies. I mean, it was amazing, right? They could just buy companies. The day the transaction closed, everybody would have business cards. They changed the name on the building, and they had a playbook, and they treated pretty much every acquisition in a very similar way. Mm-hmm. Some of those were successful, some of them were not. But they definitely were more experienced than just about anybody else at that point in time in how to do it. Mm-hmm. I would still argue, even for a company like that who does a lot of M&A, at the end, if you look back and you say, which ones, which of these actually fulfilled their promise, it's the ones where management spent a lot of time working with the acquired team and nurtured and nursed and focused on the success of that business uniquely. So I think that's my take anyway on that.
And what kind of resources do you use to continue learning and become more of an expert at change management?
Well, I would say that this is kind of like sports. It's the best way to stay fresh is work out all the time.
Sure.
It's hard to go read a book about M&A and the financial aspect of it, like the process, how M&A works. Yeah, you can learn a lot in books, but the art of getting a deal done and all the integration work and the transitions, my view is people who do it get better at it, and if you don't do it, it's pretty hard to be good at it.
Gotcha.
I don't want to imply that people who have never done it are bad at it, but it's you have no track record unless you've actually done it, and I just don't think there's a substitute for that kind of learning. Some things you just have to do. Yeah,
kind of more of that hands-on learning, actually experience it and
Absolutely.
Go through it. Yeah, for sure.
So think about it as you can go to a rock gym and you can learn to climb pretty well. But the moment you go out bouldering in the wild, that's a different story. Or you're doing, rope climbing when there's, a lot of, real danger and no mats to break or fall.
Yeah.
Things get different. Yeah, and I think that's really that's the analogy. Until you're actually doing stuff in the real world and there's high stakes, people's lives are at stake. I mean, let's not forget. It's easy to, if you're a banker, for example, it's easy to abstract the acquisition of a business to this is just dollars and cents. Somebody, selling an asset, someone's buying an asset. There's fees, and we'll move on. That's not what it's like for people on the ground. This is all about human beings, and an executive in a company, you have to balance those two things. You need to be very savvy around the financial piece and understanding the deal structure and how that's going to work. But you also have to spend just as much time, if not more, on the fact that, people's lives are at stake and looking after their well-being and also the success of that team as they go across. Those are and that's not something that you can get out of a book. It's pretty hard, actually.
Yeah, of course. What are some leaders that you look up to that, I guess, time and again, you think of them and you're like, oh yeah, like, I like what they're doing. I want to be more like that, or I want to do something like that person did, or I want to try something that they did and see if it works at my company. Is there any particular leader that inspires you?
Oh, that's a good question. I tend to always think of people that I worked with in my past, rather than just like mention kind of the obvious, learning from guys like Steve Jobs or something like that, where I didn't work at Apple.
Yeah, people in the media.
When I think back on my career, I was really lucky because the people I worked for when I first got out of school, there's just so many people to learn from, and I was in a culture that really like focused on education in the workplace, and so we got to learn from a lot of different people. And when I joined Silicon Labs, my boss there was probably he was probably the guy that got me thinking about, I could go do leadership, of a team. And he was just a great boss. When I think back on it, extremely practical. He was very demanding, but in a good way. And he was a great teacher and a great mentor. And I stay very close in touch with him to this day. Mm-hmm. And when I think about it, that's what I look for in a boss. I want to be inspired. I want to learn something. And I want someone to give me a lot of practical, know-how so that I can grow. Mm-hmm. And, his name is Ed Healy. I think he's just an amazing person.
Okay.
Great boss. And when I look back on it, I just learned so much from him. He's an awesome guy. Uh-huh. I also have to say I really, really enjoyed. I enjoyed working for almost all my bosses. So I've got really lucky. My boss at Ruckus, Selena Lowe, she is just a dynamo, super inspiring. I would say awesome in the proper use of that word, and great person. And I really enjoyed working for Craig Barrett at Atheros. He was also just an incredibly inspirational leader. So I got lucky. I've worked for a lot of really great people, and I guess I could pine away for the Eric Schmidts of the world, but I don't know them, so I can't really.
Of course, and it's good to stick with who you know, what you know. You have closer ties and closer relationships with those, and you're able to actually really experience those bosses and leaders firsthand. Whereas if you take someone like Steve Jobs, not everyone has met him when he was alive, and it's hard to. You can only take stuff that other people have fed to you, either from the media or secondhand. So yeah, that's great.
Yeah,
I really, really appreciate your time, Dan.
Excellent.
All
Thanks,
right.
Rebecca.
Thanks,
Dan.
Dan.
For your time, Rebecca.
Thank you, guys. As you can see, it is hard to write a playbook on M&As because each one is uniquely different. It's as much strategic as it is mechanical. The best we can do is study cases like Ruckus and learn as we go. And with Ruckus, we learned when it comes to compromise, never give away your essence. Although cultures may collide, they also have the power to overcome adversity. Constant communication and pointing out uncertainties can be tremendously helpful, even if it leads to more questions, because each question is one step closer to the final vision. As a leader, not only must you manage this vision, but balance the financial aspect of the merger along with the people's well-being. And yes, change can be hard, but if you treat it like a workout, it can become easier and you will become more resilient. Hey, thanks for listening. Don't forget to download the next episode so you can listen to it on your next commute or trip. You can access more great insights and other goodies on our website at launchitspot.com. You can sign up for our newsletter there, which will notify you when we post the new goods. And of course, we always appreciate shares and likes by our listeners. Did you know that you can be featured on Launch? We are always looking for interesting people who are striving to become better leaders, as well as subject matter experts in any of our content categories listed in our nav bar. Believe it or not, your story can inspire so many people. All you have to do is quickly apply on our website and we'll be in touch. Now, how are you going to lead the world?